So those of you who just are joining in right now, for us, we're now starting to broadcast live. This is going to be the second Hangout for EMRA, which is kind of a student advising council, especially for emergency medicine students. This is specifically right now for kind of fourth-year students who are in that interview season to help them kind of throughout the whole trail right now. This topic is going to focus on kind of your reflections and questions that you've had about the interview trail so far, and also questions about the rest of the interview trail, since we're about less halfway through the interview season. So we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Rachel Feynman. I'm a fourth-year medical student from the University of South Florida, and I'm helping kind of lead this conversation. You guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
I guess I'll start. I'm Diane Rimple. I'm the program director at the University of New Mexico.
I'm Dara Kass. I'm the student education director at NYU in New York.
My name's Lauren Altshu, and I'm a fourth-year medical student from Drexel University.
My name is Sean Fling, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health in Madison.
I'm Kai Del Rosario. I'm a fourth-year medical student from Ross University. I'm calling from Sydney, Australia at the moment. And by the way, if you would see a Dominica Martial Arts Club, that's also me, just using two devices.
So that's everybody.
Yep, that's everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation with a very common question that I've gotten from a lot of students. A lot of students are very worried about the amount of interviews they've gotten so far. Can you guys speak to that? How many interviews is normal at this point of time? And kind of what should we expect?
So Diane's actually expert on this, so I'm going to completely defer to her and all the data that's in her head, because anything I'm going to give you came from research that she's actually done.
I would say expert. I know from our standpoint, we are recommending students keep it to 12 interviews, particularly if they are not in a couples match or in the military match. So I would also let people know that there's a wide range of dates. Today was my first interview day for my program. We just started today and we'll go through mid-January. And so I think that the West Coast is a little bit later than the East Coast in terms of when we do our interviewing.
Yeah, New York City started somewhere in the beginning of November, and so we're about a month in most places. We tell our students that they're not allowed to keep more than 15 interviews, and so most of that is based on the data from the NRMP saying that if you have 15 interviews, and if you rank actually for the non-flagged candidates, so somebody that doesn't have a red flag, and when Diane mentions things like the military match or couples match, those are additional barriers that you're putting into yourself. So if you are an FMG, or if you are a DO, or you have any other red flags in your grades, that changes the number. But if you are otherwise a straight-laced candidate who has no flags, you really don't need more than 8 to 12 interviews. And really, if you have 8 programs on your list, you will match usually in your top 3. It's 75% chance if you have 8, and a 99% chance if you have 12.
Right. So I think from that standpoint, if you are concentrating on the East Coast, my impression is that a lot of those programs are, as Dara said, about halfway through their interview season and might be getting some cancellations. But if you are focusing more on the West Coast, many of us are just getting started.
Okay, and then I know a lot of people have that question along that same line, is when should they expect hearing or stop hearing from programs about interviews?
There's no date on that, actually, especially as cancellations come in, especially much later in the season, so middle to end of December and January. people get fatigued from interviewing. I know a lot of our students are actually fatigued already at 10 interviews, and they're going to stop accepting offers, which makes room for everyone else. So if you're a candidate that may need to wait till the middle to the end of the pack, it doesn't change your chances of matching, but it does increase your opportunity for interviews. So I would keep your calendar open if you don't feel like you have enough interviews just yet. There will be a real wave of interview offers at the end of December and January.
I agree. I think a lot of people after the winter break sort of reevaluate, and we'll get a handful of cancellations right in that first week of January after the winter break. That's also a good time to contact programs and send an email saying, hey, no, really, I'm very interested in your program.
I think that answers a big question a lot of people have. Kind of open it up to a lot of questions that you guys have before I kind of start asking more of the questions that I have emailed me.
Anyone?
Specific questions?
So I've heard from and asked this question of many current residents, but haven't really gotten the perspectives of program directors. But what do you all suggest that students look at when they go to actually create their rank list? Like, what are some things that should be highlighted? Because we know that every program has certain ACGME credentials that they have to fulfill, but outside of that, what should we be focusing on?
I think that, really it's all about your instincts and where you feel comfortable. This is not a process that is formulaic in anyone's measure. So you're not going to be able to rank 3 versus 4, location, size, trauma months, ICU months. There's no algorithm that works. Mm-hmm. You need to decide where you're going to be able to become the best emergency medicine doctor and the environment that you feel the most comfortable, whatever that looks like for you. If it's the kind of a place that feels like it's people that can train you, that get you, it's a growth process. There is no algorithm. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, and I also think that plans change, and we all know of students who come in with one plan and life throws them a curve and they go in a different direction. And so if you hang your decision on one thing, whether it's where you want to end up for your career or you think that you want to do a fellowship, you also have to recognize that that may change over time, and that there are many more things to go on. And I agree with Dara. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of that comes down to instinct and a sense of fit rather than anything else.
Thank you.
Programs, just so you guys know, and this was good for everyone out there, programs in emergency medicine are basically uniformly excellent. And I think that's a great problem to have. So it's actually very difficult to find a specific deficiency in any given program. It's one of the reasons why when you stand up at your medical school meetings and they say top 50 programs or top medical schools, there is no correlation between a top tier medical school and a top tier emergency medicine residency. We are all very good at what we do, and we all care about how we train our future doctors. And so as a specialty across the board, I think the standards are actually very, very high for EM residencies, and you should feel comfortable that a place that you've interviewed at that's credentialed and has EM board physicians and has the kind of patient population you want to learn from is going to train you to be a good EM doctor.
Right.
Along that same line, a lot of people ask questions about how important is it, like the nuances of each program, to be a level 1, like to go to a program with a level 1 trauma center that has pediatric ER attached to it and things like that. You guys have just kind of that point as well.
Diane?
Again, all these things are so personalized. I think some of it has to do with where you envision yourself going. If you know that you're going back to a small town emergency department, you may want to choose a training program that is well suited or similar to to that environment. I think, to me, a lot of it comes down more to your learning style and where you think that you would be comfortable, whether it is in a crazy, out of control, busy county program versus someplace that's a little bit more under control, and you'll have more one-on-one time with faculty and has less to do with some of those details.
Okay, thanks.
Kind of a question about sending out thank you notes. So I've had a couple of programs say, we definitely don't want thank you notes. We know that you've been trained well or what have you. So is there a general consensus on that, or as far as like writing thank you notes versus sending emails versus not saying anything?
If you really like a program and you want them to remember you and you want to say thank you, then say thank you. Do not send a note to everyone you meet because it will come across as not genuine and formulaic. If there was something special about a place and you feel the need to email the program director and be like, oh my God, that was like that thing we did, that resuscitation we saw during the interview or whatever, then write a note. This process, we're really good people and we really want you guys to do well. We don't wait for thank you notes and then check a box saying she didn't send one or she did send one. This is about making it like a human connection in a process that's all about numbers. And so don't think too much about certain process limitations like writing thank you notes. Do it if you think it's natural. Don't do it if it's not. It's not going to make or break anything for you. Fair enough?
Totally agree. I think sometimes students get nervous and feel like, gosh, I have to just because I'm not sure whether they will take it wrong if I don't or not. But honestly, generic thank you notes are just stuff my mailbox. I agree with Dara. If it's something very personal, very specific to the conversation that we had or something that you'd like to convey, that's great, but just a generic thank you is, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but just, yeah.
You're better off, and this goes across the board, you're better off writing an email like January 25th to the program and saying, by the way, interview season's over, just wanted to remind you that your interview day was one of the best I had, and I'm really excited. I really remember the day as being great. Something very positive and specific that just kind of rejuggered your name on their mind. Because at the end of an interview season, they've seen 150, candidates, and it's not that anyone's not that impactful. It's that if there's something that you want to be memorable about, send an email towards the end of January, just reminding them who you are. That's fine. And make that your thank you note. That's fine. This is all about just connecting and then you not being a face in the crowd.
I think the late emails or notes do have more impact because it does show that you have gone through the process and you are swinging back and contacting programs that are most important to you. I think we all take the specifics that are in the note in terms of how much you like a program, we take it with a little bit of salt, in the sense of I really, really like you kind of things. But yeah, I think coming back later on shows that you really do care.
On the other side of the communication question, we talked a little bit about communication after an interview. What about communication before an interview? If there's a place that you want to go that you're not hearing anything back from, or you think you're stuck on a silent wait list at this point?
Diane, you want to talk to that?
I think now's a good time to get in touch with programs. I know that I take a second look at any application from somebody who emails me, and as openings come up, I'll use the emails from people saying, really, I'm still very interested in your program to fill those holes.
along those same lines, I got a few questions about should you let programs know where they are on your rank list?
No, I don't think it matters, and at least from my standpoint, I again sort of I take it with a grain of salt.
This whole process, it's like a dance, right? You dance, they dance, you dance, they dance. You can't dance with everybody, right? And you can't, like, so you don't want to promise your firstborn to everyone on the list. You don't want to say, you're my favorite first choice, and then you don't match with them. Well, the truth is the match is rigged in the student's favor. So if you put a program as your first choice, and you are above the lowest person that matches in their program, you should have gone to their program. If you don't, that already starts at a reputation as you weren't being truthful and honest somewhere along the way. So if you're going to write a program and say that they're your first choice, go for it. But let that be the program that is actually your first choice. And don't feel like if you don't tell 4 programs that you're their first choice that you're not going to get to the top of the list. This is not a system where the math gets fixed based on what you tell the program. Okay? It only sets up the expectation that if they put you in a matching range and you have said they're your first choice, then you should guaranteed match there. And for some reason it doesn't happen, it questions your integrity. And you never want to start out your reputation in emergency medicine that way. You just never know where your paths are going to cross.
Yeah. I agree. I don't know of any program or that really takes that into too much of an account. It doesn't do us any good to stack our list with people who say that they really want to be there. It's much more about our sense of fit as well as your sense of fit. So like that.
Okay, great. Do you guys have any other questions before I go back to the list of questions?
I don't right now.
Okay. Another common question that I've gotten is, what are helpful actions to take at this point in the cycle from your standpoint? And we will also be inviting an intern in soon to give their viewpoint as well.
So what do you mean by that? So at this point in the cycle, you should be going on interviews, following up on information, and just taking it in. Like, this should not be the most stressful. There's not a lot to do right now. So you should be like, it's kind of an amazing time. You're traveling, you're shopping, you're keeping your ears and your mind open. There's not really much else to do. Is there something else that you guys think you should be doing?
Well, and I can say what you shouldn't do, which is don't start canceling interviews at the last minute because you've decided you're done with interviewing. Any cancellations in less than 2 or 3 weeks is considered very poor form. So at this point, if you're committed to interviewing over the next couple of weeks, you keep those commitments. And at this point, I would advise very strongly against canceling any interviews for the rest of December, and only consider canceling an interview that you don't need in January. I don't know if you agree with that, Dara, but
I definitely agree with that. I think that it's but it also does go back to that if you're not going to go somewhere and you have enough interviews, there's somebody else behind you that really wants that spot. And so I have at NYU, I have more of an aggressive conversation with my medical students about liberating the spot for other people rather than just going and seeing a program that they're probably not that interested in. And so if that's something you should be doing, then critically evaluating your list of interviews and deciding whether or not you really need to go there. If you've already found 1 or 2 places that make you happy, potentially one that you've already rotated at, it's pretty unlikely that if you rotated in a place, you had a great interview, you feel comfortable there, right? And you put them in your top 3, there's a really good chance you're going to match there. And so if you've gotten that feeling and if you've had that experience, then you should feel even more comfortable in the process. I'm not saying anything is a guarantee, but I'm just saying that going to 20 places just to see what they have to offer gets both redundant and it actually is a disservice to your peers that are waiting for those spots.
I think when you start going to 20 interviews, it becomes very difficult to take the time to go to the dinner or whatever meeting they have before the interview, because a lot of times you're just flying all over the place, and meeting the residents at those dinners is incredibly important. And I would say that sends a huge signal if somebody doesn't make the interview dinner the night before. For us, it's the night before. I know, and sometimes students will say, "Oh, I just couldn't get a flight in," or that sort of thing. But I think it is such an important part of the process. If you haven't rotated with us and you don't really make a big effort to make the dinner, that to me is a little bit of a black mark.
Do any of you guys have any other questions before I continue going off the list at all?
I have one. What are your thoughts on meeting with the program directors, let's say in residency fairs or at the ASEP assembly, right before your interview or maybe after your interview?
In what way?
Just talking to them and meeting with them and, attending the assembly and just a meet and greet with the program directors.
Is this for this year or is this for next year?
It's for next year, for me, for next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to be a face and not just a name. So I think that anytime you can kind of set yourself apart, I think it's fine. Those residency fairs are useful insofar as you get to meet people. They're never going to, I mean, they're not going to change much, but I don't think they're a bad idea, especially if you're trying to set yourself apart from a pack. Diane?
Okay.
I think I would say the same thing. In some ways, they're a little overwhelming because there are so many students wandering around. But I think from our standpoint, because New Mexico is sort of the polar opposite of New York, I figure if somebody made the effort to find us and say, "Hey, I'm interested in coming to New Mexico," that tells me. That tells me that they've at least heard of us as opposed to us being a random program in the desert Southwest somewhere.
Which sounds pretty nice right now with the winter.
It's lovely.
Okay, thank you.
Another common question that I got from people was, how highly do you guys weight the interviews versus grades and so on?
Every program is going to be different from that. Let me start with a generic. To be honest with you, a big part of interviews is just to make sure somebody is not really, really odd. And that sounds weird, but it's hard to get a feel for somebody on paper, and most of the time the people would be happy matching with anybody we interview with, and we're just looking for somebody who for whatever reason stands out as a particularly not great match for us. It's more of a weeding out process, but the vast majority of people we would be super happy to have on our list. So
the data that's out there on interview days is it can only hurt you, not help you, but it's necessary. So if you think about it as if you have the most benign interview day in the world, you've done yourself a service because you've made the criteria, they've met you. You can stand out as being an overwhelmingly wonderful person, and your personality can shine, and that's great. But it's much more common that somebody comes through the door and does or says something that is extraordinary in the wrong direction, and that's the memory that everyone has of them. It's not that people want to find bad things about you. It's that it's the anxiety. Interpersonal skills is what we do in emergency medicine, and so you know, the first connection you have with a patient in the ER is a lot of how you can take care of them. And so we read every applicant as what are their first impression skills, how do they talk to people they don't really know, how's their ability to make eye contact. And if you're great at that or good enough at that, then you pass. And if you have a red flag, then that's where it comes out. And that's why we interview.
So for us, we actually have literally a formula that allows us to score the entire application, including the interview, and we give certain weights to things depending on how important we feel they are. And the interview is fairly important, but I think, as Dara said, kind of more in the case of just having a really poor interview. And I think her point is also a good one, which is this is not like, oh, I just wasn't as articulate as I would like to be. It's, you know, something's really not right in terms of the interaction that you've had either with my staff or my residents or folks in the emergency department if you hang out there. So always remember, and I know everybody's heard this from day one, which is your interview starts with the that you get, and you have to really think about etiquette and just being a good, kind person throughout this process.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I know that's a common question a lot of people worry about with the interviews. Also, kind of along those lines, I've done a couple of questions on where to stay versus are you able to contact residents to see if you can like sleep on their couch or housing available if it's not on the website or something like that.
So do you guys know, I think it's called, let me just look it up right now, Swap and Share?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's what it's called. Hold on one second. We did it, we profiled it on Feminem. I don't know if you guys have seen Feminem, but that's not, I'm not doing a ridiculous plug for Feminem right now. Sorry, it's called Swap and Snooze. I take it back. It's a website that was started by 2 medical students in UC Irvine, and it's only for medical students on the interview trail who are looking basically to couch surf. It's the Airbnb for medical students doing this exact thing. So I would actually start with them because it's all over the country and they are actually emergency medicine bound students. And that's a really safe place to stay without feeling like you need to make an impression if you stay with a resident. Like, remember that if you stay with a resident, then you have the potential to be judged the whole time. So it's not such a safe place. But Swap and Snooze is a free way to stay without feeling the need to perform.
I agree. You can make a very good impression with residents, but we've certainly had people who have left a kind of bad taste in the mouth with people that they stayed. But certainly you can always get in touch with coordinators to see whether residents will put you up, and we have that available. But again, you have to. You need to be very sensitive to the fact that you're staying in somebody's home.
Do you guys any other questions before I jump to another one on the list that I have here? Okay, awesome. What is your view? Yeah, so I'm going to have Zach actually introduce before I go to the next question. We have an intern well, so I'm going to have Zach introduce himself. Zach, you gotta hear us?
Yeah. I can hear you. Sorry.
Awesome. Do you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Sure. My name is Zach Olson. I'm an intern at UT Nashville. I just did this whole interview thing last year, so I just want to give advice where I can.
Awesome. actually just got a question for someone who's applying, going to be applying for after their MPH, and they're wondering about SLOs and kind of letters of recommendation. Who do you like to see letters of recommendation for ER programs?
Who do I like to see them for?
Not you personally, but I guess more so for Dr. Rimple and Dr. Kass.
So wait, so the person's in the MPH program now.
Yes.
Is their MPH in the middle of medical school or is it at the end of medical school?
I'm not sure about that.
So for example, at NYU we have a Chinese menu of options to go through and graduate from medical school. You can get an MBA, an MPH, an MPA, all these things sometime during school. And so you come back and you finish the last semester, the last year, depending how it goes. If this student is going back to school after finishing the MPH, then they should get the SLO letters at that section right before the interview. Most of the reason why is that letters that are over 1 year old don't hold the same weight as ones that are current or recent. So that's first of all. So I tell my students who are going for an MBA, I actually don't even write their letters into the year they're applying. Even if they've rotated earlier, they have to come back and do some sort of extra time so that they can get a better letter. Regarding what kind of letters we like as a specialty, we want, and we're working on this as a leadership, 2 letters, I would say, on average, in emergency medicine SLOs, usually one from your home institution and one from an away institution, that gives a perspective of how you work in the ER. Those letters are, I would say, 1,000,000 times more valuable than your off-service support letter from your medicine service chief or whatever person thought you were a great preceptor student on the wards. It's fine if those extra letters give a sense of color to who you are or speak to something that you've done that's extraordinary. That third letter can be anything. If it's EM, that's great. If it's not, it's fine. But I would say you need 2 letters, 2 SLO letters in emergency medicine describing how you function in the ER to feel like you have the average emergency medicine application submitted. Diane?
I agree. I think the one thing that I would add there is that if you have worked very closely with somebody during your MPH or have published something or have a real product to show for the work you've done with the MPH, having a letter from that is fine. And I would say I totally agree with Dara that all I really care about is the EM letters, and I would say that an MPH letter from someone who has worked with you very closely and for an extended period of time is much more powerful than the preceptor for 1 month in a clerkship outside of EM.
Okay, great. And I have a quick question for Zach. Kind of being in the middle of the season right now, what would you suggest for students, and how? Kind of what were your feelings also at this time of the interview season?
At this time last year, I remember it was kind of in the second round of interviews where there was like more invitations coming in that I hadn't gotten like initially. There was a lot of coordination with trying to figure out how to fit in different interviews and that sort of thing. But the main thing was just at this point in the interview season, I was kind of in my groove a little bit, and I think the most important thing is I was just trying to pick up. The most important thing to me was what was my sort of gut feeling about a program, and everywhere I went, I was just really focused on whether or not, like, if the different faculty and the program director, if I felt like they were going to be someone that I would be able to connect with and work with for the next 3 years, as opposed to the first 4 or 5 interviews where I was just worried about saying something stupid the whole time.
Do you guys have any other questions before I start kind of reading off some more?
Yeah. Zach, in hindsight, now that you're an intern, you've successfully gone through this process, is there anything that you would do different or that you wish that you would have known?
That's a good question. I think looking back, the thing that I wish I had done different is kind of what I was saying before, with paying attention to the gut feeling. Like, the main thing now that I'm an intern, I'm sitting in on these dinners with different medical students and talking to them, and I've sat in on a few of the sort of rank list meetings and that kind of thing. It's pretty hard to kind of really mess up bad enough where you're falling off rank lists and that sort of thing. I wish, looking back, I had spent more time just trying to figure out if the program was the right fit for me. I spent so much time going into interviews, writing out questions and my answers to questions, and I'd memorize in my head the answers to questions. And I think a lot of it was, it's my opportunity to interview them too and to really figure out what they have to offer, and I didn't take advantage of that, especially in the first half of the interview season.
Thanks.
Along those lines, what tips can you give to students to help them remember the programs as kind of we're starting to go on more and more, and the programs start to blend together? Kind of good for all of you guys.
I think Caroline said give her bedtime.
Maybe you can get her in the morning.
Zach, did you do any time in the emergency departments where you interviewed?
So I did not actually do any away rotation.
Okay.
In regards to
when you interviewed, did you like spend the day in the evening?
Yeah. When I interviewed, the program, not every program offers the opportunity to do a rotation in their department, but whenever they did, I certainly took that opportunity, and it actually affected kind of what I thought a lot. Seeing, not just walking through the department, but actually seeing kind of how the flow is and what type of patients go through. I know, like, at my department, when I had an opportunity to kind of sit in, it's very quiet because all the patients have their own rooms, and it kind of seemed less busy than when it was. But when I was actually there and seeing how quickly patients were moved through these rooms, it kind of changed my sort of just opinion of how busy the department was. So I would definitely say that if you have the opportunity, just even for an hour, just to kind of shadow in the department, that I would take that opportunity. I thought it was really helpful for me.
The reason that I asked is that I recommend it. I think that would help Rachel with what you're describing, which is sort of everything blending together. I think if you spend time in their emergency department, you remember it. I think it's also helps with that whole gut instinct and how would I like it here, how would I fit in there. I think actually being in the department gives you a chance to talk to faculty and residents who aren't at the sort of officially sanctioned events, and you can get a feel for how the faculty and residents work together actually in real life in the clinical environment.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. And I'll say this too, not all of the programs will initially offer on interview day the opportunity to shadow in their emergency department. But when you kind of get to this point in the interview season, you have maybe 3 programs that you're kind of looking at. If you haven't had the opportunity to be there and really see it, most programs are willing to set up the opportunity for you to kind of observe them for an hour or two and shadow and kind of do like a second look thing, so that you can really get a feel for what's going on at the programs that are in the top of your rank list, because those are the programs you're most likely to end up at. In fact, there was one program where they refused to kind of let me, come back for a second look. They didn't let anyone come back for a second look. At least that's what they told me, and that was kind of a red flag for me, and I ended up not ranking that program.
I would say we don't refuse to have people do a second look, but we definitely don't encourage it. That may partly be because we're in Albuquerque, and that's a long way for most people to go. I tell people the only reason to do a second look is if it's for you. It's definitely not for us. You don't want to get into a situation where students feel like they have to come back for a second look to feel like a program will take them seriously. For us, it's like bring a family member who you're dragging with you, or come and spend a whole day if you weren't able to do it when you interview, but don't do it to impress the program.
And I absolutely agree with that. Now, in retrospect, with our program, whether or not a student comes for a second look has like no bearing at all on how we rank them or anything like that. Like, it's a non-factor. Only do it if you're either already in the area or it's somewhere in the top of your list, and it's really important that you need some more information to see how that department works.
Before I kind of read off one more question that I've got, do any of you guys have any other questions? I know we're starting to get towards 10 o'clock. Questions? Okay. The last question I have that someone sent me is, what do you guys feel about, as it's also especially for you, Zach, bringing their significant other to the dinner or the event beforehand?
I mean, I've seen it done both ways. I never did. I usually sent my wife out into the city, and I'd kind of have her doing the exploring of the city, and I would go to the dinner. I've seen it done both ways. It's very important that your significant other is on the same page with the program. I know for my wife, it was very important that she was in a location that she was comfortable with. And so when I was at interview, I sent her out, and I was like, just drive around, see if this is a place where you could live, and then I'll go to the dinner and do the talking. That's how I did it. I don't know. I guess it could be done either way.
We have a lot of families in our residency, and they bring them to the dinner. And I think that for folks who are bringing somebody with them, it can be incredibly helpful having those conversations with other family members to say, what is it really like living here? And it gives that sense of how close the residents are, and whether they would also have a peer group, support group while they're being dragged all over the country.
So I will interject the geographic, I want to say bias here, but this is a very non-major urban center phenomenon, bringing your spouse to the dinners, which I think is great. But like in New York, we have like, I don't know, 27 emergency medicine residencies. And so if you come to New York and you're going to live here, it's less common in the New York programs for the significant other to come to the dinner. Mostly because A, they're grounded already in New York for some reason or another, because why else would you live here if you didn't have to? And B, the partner usually is coming for either their own reasons or has their own network of support before they start. So we have actually less married residents, we have less parents, we have less, just like as a city in general, than the programs like in West Virginia or New Mexico or in Nashville. So I think that when you go to those programs, you're going to find more familial-based things because the residency is much more of a cohort of support, whereas in New York, the residents, a lot of them live their original lives in a very undisturbed way through residency. And so
you live in what with that?
So if you go, my point is if you come to a New York program and you bring your spouse and nobody else does, it's not that they're not supportive of your spouse, it's that culturally everyone's kind of just living their own life. And so we don't usually bring our partners along for these things as much.
Right.
Both from my own experience personally when I was interviewing and now. I mean, we only have like 5 married residents out of 60 at NYU. And we have no parents. One parent, I take back.
No.
That's fine.
Does it affect your ranking of students at all? Does it affect your ranking of students at all, whether or not they bring their spouse? I mean,
I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. I think
every detail I was like thinking about.
I just don't want people to think that if they bring their spouse and there are no other spouses, that somehow the program is not family-centered or wouldn't support them through whatever transitions in life they have. But I can say culturally in New York, we're just not. It's sad a little, but our residencies aren't as integrated in and out of work as much as they are when you're a little more isolated geographically from, a bar in every corner. Not to disparage the bar, New Mexico.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, not at all, actually. It's something that I actually find very endearing and heartfelt. But foreign, still.
Right. I know all my residents' kids and dogs' names.
And I know them too because we're Facebook friends, but it's not like I've ever met them.
No.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kass and Dr. Rimple, and Zach for kind of helping with this conversation. Our next one will be probably more towards the end of the interview season, and we're going to talk a little bit more about rank list and kind kind of helping students through that experience and the match process. So thank you guys so much for joining in and helping out with the conversation. And great question.
We all have them. Well, good luck, guys. If you have any questions, reach out, okay?
Thanks very much for doing this, guys.
Thank you.
Really
Bye.
appreciate it.
Bye.
Yeah.